But okay, my name's Maria Wiscombe, and I am the parent consultant for the Utah Parent Center for Alpine School District. And I work closely with the special education department, and but I'm a support to families. So here's my contact information, and you should have all received the handouts for tonight in an email from registering for the workshop tonight. But they will also be posted on the parent resource page on the Alpine School District Special Ed website as well, for those who will be watching this in the future to reference to. So here's my contact information. The Parent Center provides supports to families who have children with special needs, children, youth, and young adults. So we work with families from 0 to into adulthood. So there's no one that we don't work with. All of the parent consultants at the Parent Center have a child with special needs. So we also are living the dream with you. So I have a daughter who is in the post-high program in the district. And so we also have lived through and go through the IEP process. We've worked with teams throughout the year, or throughout the years, and just I have that personal experience as well as having worked for the Parent Center for over 8 years. So that's a little bit about the Parent Center. If you have questions as we go through this presentation, I ask you to put them in the chat box. We may be able to answer some of them during the presentation, but most of the questions will be answered through our Q&A at the end. I also have Ryan Burke on here with me. He is the Director of Special Education, and so he will also be helping answer questions after the presentation. He's waving if you've got your cameras up. And that's recorded, so there you go. All right, so I knew I skipped a slide. So what we're going to go over tonight is the IEP process, and we'll go through things fairly quickly. But if you have, like I said, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box as they come up so you don't forget, and then so we can make sure that we answer them at the end. But we're going to talk about the IEP process, also who the key members of the IEP team are, and then the different components of the IEP, and then communicating with the IEP team. And there's not necessarily a specific order because so many of these are covered throughout the whole presentation. So, like I said, if we miss anything, put it in the chat box and we'll answer your questions. And then also you received a link for the Parents as Partners in the IEP Process Handbook. And these slides go along with that handbook. There's a note at the bottom of each slide, as you see on this page, that connects to what is in the handbook. So that way you can go to that direct link. So first of all, I want to talk about working together as a team. And oftentimes parents feel like they are part, sorry, I talk with my hands. I guess I need to make sure you can see my hands. Anyway, sometimes parents feel like they are one side of the team and that the school is the other side of the team. And sometimes it can feel a little daunting when you go to an IEP meeting and you're the only parent there and everybody else is on the school side of things. But the goal is to have everybody work together and especially help the parents feel like an equal member, equal partner of the team. The school side, the school members of the team are the educational specialists, but you as a parent are the specialist on your child. So you bring a lot to the table that the team may not know. And so being able to work with your team and communicate with your team as an equal partner is important. Communicating, I've found over the years that validating and acknowledging what this different members of the school team are doing definitely helps bridge any gaps and alleviate any I don't want to say hard feelings, but maybe feelings of frustration or not feeling like you're working together as a team. But one parent that I've worked with in the past, she was having a hard time feeling like the principal was on the same page as she was. And at some point she said, I feel like I've totally burned bridges. And I feel like, you know, he's not going to be on the same page as me and concerned about my child. And I'd like to somehow apologize and work with him. And so I suggested that she write him a note and maybe give him a candy bar. And because I explained to her as well that, you know, she's thinking about her child in the middle of all this other students at the school, where the principal is thinking about all of the students in the school as well as that child. So the principal most likely is not hyper focused on maybe the tension that might be there from the parent. And so she went ahead and wrote a note and gave him a candy bar. And from there on, she just felt super comfortable with him and everything was great. So I've seen different things happen with parents to work on that communication. But honestly, the thing that I feel is most important is validating the other team members, acknowledging what they're doing, what they're putting forth, and planning for your child and working with your child. That goes a long way. And the focus really is at an IEP meeting is the student. So even sometimes bringing a picture of your student to the meeting can be super helpful in having everybody focus on the main topic, which is the student. Okay. All right. So IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that's the law that governs, or that IEP's individualized education programs fall under. It provides early intervention and special education from infants to youth with disabilities till graduation or certificate of completion. So that's what IDEA is, and you'll hear that referred to as IDEA oftentimes as well, because this is a world of acronyms, right? And then we have free appropriate public education. The acronym for that is FAPE, so you'll hear both. But every student, especially including special education students, have access to a free and appropriate public education. So if your child qualifies for speech services or physical therapy services or reading, all of those services are provided to the student at no cost, and they're all provided through the IEP. And then also another thing to remember is that public schools include both school districts and charter schools. So charter schools are their own districts. So there are several charter schools that are within Alpine School District boundaries, but just because they're inside the boundaries does not mean they fall under Alpine School District. They are their own district. But they are held to the same responsibilities as a big school district is. So I'm providing special education services to students that qualify. So you've probably, if your child has an IEP, you've probably have received at least one of these procedural safeguards. They are offered at every IEP meeting, so at least once a year. And they tell you what you and your students' rights are. The key points in the procedural safeguards are that no evaluation, no change in the program can happen without the parent and or student's consent. So the student consent comes into factor when the student turns 18. But no change in placement, no change in the IEP can happen without the parent's consent. Also, a parent has the right to access the records. And another focus on the procedural safeguards are prior written notices. And a prior written notice is given when there is a change in placement or evaluation. So if there's going to be a change in those, you would receive a prior written notice. And then also the procedural safeguards talk about disciplinary procedures and how they apply to students who are in the special education program. And then it also talks about problem-solving procedures. So, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation, but talks about if you are having problems with your IEP team, where you start, and we'll talk about the chain of communication in a little bit. But the procedural safeguards goes through this detail by detail. Also, I want to note too, I have a copy of the procedural safeguards that was just printed off the printer. But on page 2 inside the procedural safeguards, this is my, let's see if you can see that. Anyway, if you can see that on page 2, it lists the Utah Parent Center as one of the resources that you can reach out to with questions. So oftentimes I'll hear new parents that call me saying, why have I never heard about the Utah Parent Center? Well, if you look inside the procedural safeguards, which oftentimes we tend to not do so because it can seem a little overwhelming or daunting to read a lot of legal words, but the Utah Parent Center's contact information is inside the procedural safeguards. So that's a little plug there. All right, so this is an overall view of the special education process, and we'll talk about each one of these, but I really like this diagram because it really breaks it down visually to see how everything flows. Initially, there's a referral, and the referral can come from a parent or it can come from the school, but the school cannot evaluate a student without the permission of the written consent of the parents. So even if the school refers a child, if a parent says they don't want to have them evaluated, the school cannot evaluate. But so the referral comes, the evaluation process is then started, and we'll go, like I said, into this a little more detail. But then from the evaluation, eligibility is determined. So whether or not the student is eligible for any specialized instruction. And from that eligibility and what the student qualifies for, the IEP is developed. So the Individualized Education Program, which are the goals that work on the deficits that the student has that were found in the evaluation. And then from the IEP goals, placement is determined. So sometimes we want to jump to placement, but the goals help determine where the best place is for the student to receive their services that they qualify for. And then every year, at least once a year, the IEP needs to be reviewed. So the evaluation process may happen every 3 years, but the actual IEP meeting has to be held at least once a year. And we'll talk about this a little more, like I said, all of this in a little more in detail. So initiating the process. Most of you, I would assume, and I can't ask for a raise of hands because I'm not going to be able to see it, but most of you may already have a child with an IEP, but this applies to you especially if you feel like your child needs more support than what they are getting. But an initial referral, you'll want to always do it in writing, make the request in writing, and explain your concerns, why you feel like your child needs specialized instruction. Any outside information that you have can be helpful to the team. Neuropsychological evaluations, information from therapists, and I always encourage parents to give a summary of that information. So you can give the school the whole packet that you get from the neuropsychological evaluation, but it's going to be a lot more helpful and more reasonable for the team to look at it if you give them a summary, and then they could refer to the packet. But then also giving that initial request to the principal or the administrator. So typically in the elementary schools, the principal is over the special education. A lot of times in the secondary schools, so middle school, high school, junior high, it's oftentimes an assistant principal. And so you want to find out who that administrator is, often referred to as an LEA, local education agency representative. That's a long word, long term. But that's who the referral needs to start with. You can talk with the teacher, but the actual referral needs to start with an administrator. A teacher can't make the decisions, the administrator does. And then he gets the information out to those that need to be doing the evaluations. So after an evaluation has been requested, the LEA will make a decision on whether or not to proceed. An LEA can choose, I don't want to say choose, but make the decision that the child does not need special education services, but they need to have information to back that up. And that information would be given to you through a prior written notice. There's different levels of support at the school level. There's special education. One step down from that is a Section 504 plan, which is accommodations. So a student that may have a disability and may need accommodations but does not need specialized instruction, they would most likely qualify for a 504 plan. And then there is a level of support, it's called RTI, Response to Intervention, that's provided for all students. And so sometimes, especially like in the beginning grades, a student may struggle with reading, with math, and the school may provide a reading recovery program to help bridge that gap in hopes that that will get this student caught up on reading so that they don't need specialized instruction. So RTI, Section 504 plans, and IEPs are different supports available through the district. And so that's kind of a long answer, but to the first point on this slide, that this principal may want to look at providing RTI and or accommodations to see if that will help bridge the gap of the student so that the student does not need special education services. So the next step is evaluation after you make that referral. And the evaluation overall goal is to determine if the student has a disability under IDEA. And there's 13 classifications. We'll get to another slide that talks about that. The evaluation helps determine the educational needs of the student. And the data can be collected through a formal evaluation, but it can also be collected through RTI, Response to Intervention. So like I just talked about, the teachers can put in place interventions to see if those are going to help bridge the gap. If they don't help bridge the gap, that's going to help the teachers collect more data that will help back up the evaluation process to help determine whether or not the student qualifies for special education. And once this consent to evaluate is signed by the parent, the school has 45 school days to provide the whole evaluation process. If at any point, well, when the education evaluation is done and if the parent does not agree with what the team has determined, they can request an independent education evaluation through the district, and the district can accept or deny that request. But if they accept that request, they will give you a list of evaluators that can provide that independent education evaluation. I have really not seen this happen. Ryan probably has, because he's the director and he sees a lot more than I do. But if you want to go through the district in order to have this paid for, if you were to just go out and get your own evaluations done and bring them to the table, that is going to provide good information to the team, but that's not going to determine eligibility. It will be very helpful information, but you need to go through the district and their educational evaluations to have it, to support the IEP eligibility. So hopefully that makes sense. If that doesn't, put it in the chat box. And I'm seeing that we have several questions, so that's going to be good. We'll have a lot to answer. Okay, reevaluation occurs at least once every 3 years. So I've talked to parents, especially of students who are in kindergarten, saying, do we have to go through this process every year to determine eligibility? No, you don't. The reevaluation occurs at least once every 3 years, or when a parent or teacher requests evaluation. So I've seen this happen sooner than 3 years if a student is making great progress and it's looking like they don't need as much support through the special education services. And so a team cannot take away services without doing an evaluation to show that the student no longer needs those supports. And then if you have any concerns that come up, something new has happened and you're noticing a big change in behavior or something else, you can ask the team to evaluate your student in a particular area that may not already be covered on that student's IEP. Okay, qualifying for services. These are the eligibility classifications. There's 13 of them, and a student needs to fall under one of these categories. I am not seeing developmental delay on our list. That one needs to be on there as well. Typically, developmental delay is a classification for a student until they're about 7, if they don't fit hard and fast under one of these other classifications. And then once they turn 7, the team will work on together, which includes the parents, on determining what classification fits that student and their needs. Now, I've talked to parents who are concerned with what classification their student is placed under and wondering if it's going to determine what services they receive. And for the most part, no, it's not going to determine what services they receive. The evaluation and their IEP is what determines what services they need and qualify for. So there are students who have Down syndrome and autism, and sometimes the intellectual disability piece is more prominent than the autism traits, and so that student would be placed under intellectual disability. But if the autism traits are stronger and they need more supports in that area than the intellectual disability, then they will be placed under autism. but that's not going to take away or give them more services. They receive the services that they qualify for. So I talked a little bit about these prongs, but in a roundabout way. So these 3 prongs are what qualifies a student for special education. They need to have a disability that meets the criteria under IDEA. That disability needs to adversely affect their access and performance in the educational setting. And then the child, because of the disability and their performance, their educational performance, the student requires specialized instruction or related services. So that 3rd prong is the key piece in a student's eligibility for special education services. The first 2 prongs, oftentimes if a student meets the first 2, they will most likely qualify for a 504 plan, which, like I said, is accommodations to help them access the education, but it does not provide specialized instruction. So developing the plan. The IEP is your child's written individualized education program, and it's developed, reviewed, and revised in a team meeting. So an actual IEP cannot be put together without a team's effort. And that team includes the parent. So there's 4 key players on the IEP team, and they actually, if the 4 key players are not in the meeting, then it is a meeting and not an IEP, actual IEP meeting. So the 4 key players are the parent, the special ed teacher, the regular ed teacher, and the LEA representative. So if the principal can't be there, the principal can delegate the LEA responsibilities to the vice principal or another administrator. But those 4 people are key players. I have been in IEP meetings where the gen ed teacher has had to step out to go back to a class, and one of the directors from the district special ed team was in that meeting, and she stopped the meeting and said, well, we need to wait until another general ed teacher can come. So that's how important all key players are to be in that meeting. So if you are in a meeting and one of those key players are not there, you have the right to say, we need to stop until another gen ed teacher or another LEA representative can join us, or we need to reschedule and reconvene. If there's any evaluations, there needs to be someone there that can interpret the evaluations. And then also, if your child, your student receives any related services, the providers for those related services need to be there as well. I have been in meetings with for my daughter where the occupational therapist can't be there, but they've made that request or have let the LEA know that they can't be there, and I need to sign permission that it's okay that they're not there, but they also need to have their input to the IEP provided so that we can go over it at that meeting. I always want to say any questions, but if you have questions, type them in the chat box and we'll get to them.
Excuse me, Maria, in the previous slide, we had the terminology related service provider, and there's a question in the chat. Would related service provider refer to speech or occupational therapists and others that help like that?
Yes, exactly. So good question. So speech, adaptive PE, occupational therapy, if a student needs physical therapy, a school psychologist, those are related service providers. Thank you, Esperanza. All right, so we've talked already about this. You need to have at least 1 IEP meeting per year, but you can request, or the teacher can request, any member of the team can request to meet more often if needed. And we don't want to take advantage or we don't want to go over the top and ask to meet as an IEP team more than necessary. But if there are areas of concern that need to be addressed, then asking to reconvene is a great idea. I talk with parents who feel like the goals may be out of reach for the student and want to meet with the team to break them down a little further so that the student is having success, or they may feel like they're making great progress and need to meet to redo the goals to take them a step up. So if behavior concerns come up, oftentimes you will meet more to put together a behavior intervention plan, but oftentimes there's behavior goals that are added to an IEP. So those are a few reasons why you might want to ask for an IEP meeting sooner than the 1-year mark. Oh, sorry. Okay, components of the IEP. So present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, that is listed at the top of each goal area. So you may be doing goals for math, and at the top of the math page is an area that talks about the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. This talks about where the student is, what their disability is, how it affects their access to that area, and what supports they need. So that, you are probably familiar with that section, but that's what is called the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Sometimes it's hard as a parent to listen to that because we don't want to hear where our student struggles, but we need to know, and the school needs to know, in order to determine what goals are going to be written into the IEP, which is the next thing. The next step is annual measurable goals. And these are done for a whole year, a 12-month period. So I've been in IEP meetings with parents who the team meets in the spring and the student is in 6th grade, and the team does their best to put goals together that are going to transfer with that student into junior high. And sometimes, well, a lot of times the goals are perfect and transfer great. Occasionally they might need to be tweaked a little bit. So once a student starts junior high, and so that might be a time where you want to request to have an IEP meeting to make sure that the goals are appropriate and make any adjustments needed. And then the services, the service page has gone over to go over any related services and any special education extra needs that they have. So this would go over like assistive technology. It would go over possibly transportation, any supports to students getting through occupational therapy and things like that. And it kind of flows over into the supports part. So supplementary aids, modifications, and accommodations. So I'm just trying to think of a couple of examples. Transportation is one. Accommodations would be something like toileting need or personal assistance needs. It could be that a student has preferential seating, so the student might need to sit up front in the class to be able to eliminate distractions. And it, like I said, it can be assistive technology where a student might need to use voice to text or take their tests orally. So someone reads them their test and then they give them their answers orally. So these are the different components in the IEP. Let me do something with my mouse and I lose my arrow. Okay, so we've already discussed what comes on the present levels. Strengths. Also, bringing information to the table is a great idea, but one of them, there needs to be conversation. There should be, I shouldn't say needs, there should be conversation prior to an IEP meeting with the team, between the parent and the team, to go over ideas for the goals. And so that's when a parent, if they have outside information, that's when a parent would bring it to the team's attention, so that when you meet with the IEP team, you're not bringing a whole bunch of new information to the table that they haven't seen and asking, you know, to make adjustments to the IEP. So any communication that you can have with the IEP team prior to the IEP meeting is super helpful. But they take that all into consideration, including, you know, any evaluations or data they've collected over the period of time since the last IEP meeting. And any extra information that's going to help with those present levels. And then once the needs are identified, the team's going to work together to develop appropriate goals. And the goals, like I mentioned before, need to be measurable and have purpose. I have, the majority of the time, I do attend meetings quite a bit with parents throughout the district. So that's one of the things that I can do in my role as a parent consultant. I come as a support to the parent. I come also in a non-adversarial role. So I'm not a legal advocate, but I come to help brainstorm and to help clarify if the parents need anything clarified, and just to help things go smoothly. And I've got to think where I was going to go with that. So, excuse me. Sometimes a parent might see a goal that seems a little too out of reach for their student, but the team feels like that's an appropriate goal for a 12-month period, which oftentimes it is. But sometimes you can work with the team to put in benchmarks to reach that goal. So that's something to think about as well, is developing benchmarks so that you can see that progress that the student is making towards the overall goal. And then all the goals need to be monitored for progress. So you will oftentimes receive, well, you will receive a progress report at least as often as report cards are received. And that shows you the progress that your student is making towards each of the IEP goals. Okay, and one thing that we need as parents for our students is having high expectations for them, but being realistic. A term that was floating around in the legal side of special education was having goals be appropriately ambitious. So what might be appropriately ambitious for my daughter may not be appropriate ambitious for your child. And so you want, that's where the individualized personal piece comes into setting goals, but you want to have high expectations and stretch your kids, but be realistic at the same time. Okay, so specialized education is the instruction and education that is designed to meet your child's individualized education or individual educational needs. This services are not a place, so services, it's not the placement, but it's the set of services that can be provided in many different places. So occupational therapy can be provided in the gen ed classroom or in a special classroom or in the occupational therapist's office. Speech therapy can be provided one-on-one with a speech therapist or in group speech therapy or in the whole classroom. So services can be provided in a variety of ways or a variety of places. And these are a list of some of the related services so that goes back to one of the questions. This gives you an idea of some of the related services that are available to students. And then there is a services page on the IEP that talks about the services, the date the services begin, and the modifications that would be put in place, as well as their frequency and location and duration. So as most of us have experienced with COVID in the beginning of the school year, because of the shortened school day, a lot of modifications were made to the duration or the minutes that our students receive in their different special education services. So that gives you an example of what that looks like. And then supports, we already talked about these a little bit too. Supplementary aids does not have an E on it. So supplementary aids would be like assistive technology and something like that. An aid with an E on it is like a paraeducator aid or a 504 aid. And those are not written into an IEP. So we're talking about aids as far as like assistive technology and things like that when we talk about supports. And if you have any questions about this, go ahead and put this in the chat. So there's also an assessment page. So you talk about accommodations that are going to happen in the classroom, and then if a student participates in the statewide testing, though a lot of those accommodations will flow over into their assessments. So they will have access to those accommodations while doing their state assessments. All right, and then briefly, transition plans become part of a student's IEP when they are about the age of 14. And the goal of a transition plan is to help a student be ready to transition into adult life when they leave the school system. So whether they receive a diploma or a certificate of completion, they have a transition plan that follows them from the age of 14 till they leave, till they graduate or exit out. And the goals can be related to employment, education, and life skills. So depending on the aspirations of the student, the goals will be directed towards that. And you can also take a look at, the student's schedule, the classes they're taking, and help gear those towards some of the skills as well. So if a student needs to be working on life skills, they may need to take a money management class, a cooking class, things like that. So if they're interested in botany, they might need to take an agriculture class. So that gives you an idea of what can be part of the transition component of the IEP. And then student participation, that's key. And I've seen students participate as young as probably 4th and 5th grade. You don't have to have your student participate, but once they turn 14, they should participate in some way. So I've worked with parents who have had their students participate just the first 5 minutes of an IEP, where they come in, introduce themselves, tell the team what they like to do, what their interests are, and then tell them where they feel like they need help. They may even talk about what accommodations they feel like they need in order for them to do better in school. So even if it's for, like I said, 5 minutes, I think it just really adds a lot to the IEP meeting to have students participate. I've been in IEP meetings where a student is nonverbal and the teacher has worked with the student in putting together a PowerPoint and on an iPad, and the student just taps the PowerPoint and advances the slides to help direct the meeting. And so the students can participate at any level. And I just think it's awesome as well for them to learn how to advocate for themselves. And so whatever little bit they can participate really helps them with their advocacy skills and learning that. Okay, placement. This can be a tricky topic. You've heard of least restrictive environment, LRE, and that should be provided to the maximum extent appropriate, where they are interacting with students who are not disabled. I'm going to go back. Okay, so least restrictive environment can mean different things for different students. So I use my daughter as an example. I'm totally fine with that. So for her to participate in a gen ed setting, she would need quite a few supports. So actually, her being in a gen ed setting would actually be more restrictive and not provide her with the appropriate supports that she needs to access her education. But for another student, they may need minimal supports. So for them to be in gen ed with some resource support may be the least restrictive environment. A student cannot be placed in a more restrictive setting. So if a student only needs the support in resource, but a parent wants them to be in a life skills class or in a self-contained resource where they're in a resource class for 3 hours a day, but the student does not qualify, it would be against the law for the school to put them in that more restrictive setting. But then on the flip side, if I really wanted to, a parent can refuse placement. So if I wanted to refuse the placement for my daughter and I wanted her to be in a gen ed setting, I could refuse placement, but the school cannot duplicate the supports that are already being provided in a small group class in a gen ed setting, if that makes sense. So I can't ask for her to be in a gen ed setting with a one-on-one aid when there's that support already being provided in a small group class. So that might give you more information that you need, but I hope that helps kind of clarify how placement works. And it looks like Ryan's answering some questions too, so that's great. Okay, examples of placement options. Regular classes, so gen ed classes, special classes. Resource would probably fall in between regular classes and special classes. Special classes are typically life skills classes, autism specific classes, emotionally disturbed behavioral unit classes. Those are special classes. And then special schools are, in our district, our Dan Peterson School and Horizon, where there are a lot of supports to support those students with significant needs. And then home instruction, which doesn't apply to the COVID piece of home instruction, but if a student is too medically fragile to attend school, they may need home instruction. And home instruction could be just for a short period of time if a student has an illness that lasts for 3 months or so, or maybe in chemotherapy, things like that, but also have an IEP. They may need home instruction for a short amount of time or a long period. A one-on-one aid is actually the most restrictive setting. So we're talking not a Section 504A that provides accommodations, but a one-on-one aid that provides instruction. That would be the most restrictive placement. And so schools are often, it's mostly against the law, actually, like I said, to put a student in the most restrictive setting when they don't qualify for that. All right, so placement also This is a little equation to help you figure out how placement is determined. It's based on the IEP and goals. So placement, you don't just jump to it. You got to look at the IEPs, the IEP and the goals. Our district is big. So if a student is in a special class, they may not be at their neighborhood school, especially on the elementary level. All the secondary schools do have life skills classes. So every junior high and high school has a life skills class. You need to consider harmful effects that, you know, the different placement settings may have. All of this helps determine placement. So it's not just oh, we should just send them here. There's a lot of thought that goes into determining placement. Okay, in Utah, the signature on the IEP means that you were there and participated. I've talked to parents where they're hesitant. They don't agree with something on the IEP, so they don't want to sign it. If you don't agree with something on the IEP, you want to make sure that you either have them put a note in the IEP, you write a note in the IEP where, you know, saying what you don't agree with, and talk with the team about when you can meet to go over your disagreement. But you want to sign it because you want to show that you were there and that you did participate in the meeting. And so it's crucial. You want to show that you were an active participant in the meeting. Like I said, if you don't agree with something, make a note, have them make a note on the IEP, initial it, and then ask to schedule a time where you can go over that and clarify it, make it to where everybody agrees with your concern. Okay, problem solving. So we talked a little bit about the chain of communication. The Parent Center is made up, I said, of parents who have children with special needs, and we provide a lot of parent-to-parent support. One thing that we can do is help families connect to community resources. If you were to ask a teacher, you know, what support groups are out there, or I need a new therapist, the teachers actually can't give you that list, but we as parent consultants can. So if you're looking for anything, any supports, like I said, new pediatrician, someone that can do a neuropsychological evaluation, behavior supports, things like that, we can help give you those resources. So we provide individual consultations. Everything is kept confidential. So even though I work closely with the special ed department, I don't share information with them about the parents and students that I talk with unless I've received permission from the parents to talk with the district, but I only do so with the parents' permission. We provide trainings and workshops like this. I do parent nights once a month during the school year. This year they're going to be all via Zoom, but you can receive that information hopefully through the school, but I'll also post it on the parent resource page. And by signing up for a workshop, you are added automatically to our confidential email list, so you'll get information. But us as parent consultants, we can help you with problem solving and knowing who to talk to at the school level, at the state level, things like that. So when there's concerns, not necessarily at the dispute level, but any concerns with what's going on with your student, you can talk to a parent consultant at any time, but I will always ask you, have you talked to the special ed teacher? And then if you have, and the problem isn't being resolved at that level, then I'll ask if you've talked to the LEA or principal, and then I'll direct you to the district special education director over your school. So there's that level. If you were to call directly to the district special ed office to ask to talk to a director, the director will most likely ask you if you have talked to the special education teacher and then the principal. So you want to start at the ground level and work up. I've talked with parents who have been concerned about getting repercussions from the teacher. And if that happens, then you need to talk to the principal or the district, because that should not happen if you are talking to someone about a concern. They should not take it out on you or the student. But there's a reason why these levels of support are put in place. We need to get to our questions, and I'm almost done. There is a formal dispute resolution process, which is explained very thoroughly in the procedural safeguards. So there's different levels of mediation, a complaint, due process, and civil action. And hopefully any of your questions and concerns can be addressed before it gets to this level. And I know that the district is very adamant about working with parents through this as well. And then one thing to remember is the IEP is not etched in stone. It can be changed at any point. So if you go into an IEP meeting and you think, oh, this is how it is for the next year, that's not true. Like we've talked about, you can go ask to meet with the IEP team and revisit any concerns that you have. And then we also feel at the Parent Center that IEP also stands for Informed Effective Parents. I have been introduced as assertive, luckily not aggressive, but there's times when I've had to be assertive and advocate for my daughter, be a little more vocal about it. But I also feel like I've never burnt bridges. I guess that's why I'm in my role. Otherwise the district wouldn't have me filling this role. But advocating for our kids is very important, but being informed and educated definitely helps the process go more smoothly. So we're going to go to questions, and I am going to be looking at my other screen, so forgive me for a minute, but let's see. So someone asked, where can we find a copy or access the procedural safeguards if you haven't received one? I have a link to it on the parent resource page. That the link to that page is on. Oh, and it looks like Esperanza also posted the link to the Utah State Board of Education's procedural safeguards. If you request an evaluation, Ryan, did you answer those questions? Ryan, maybe take yourself off of mute.
Yeah. So I hope I've been keeping up on them and haven't missed one. Sometimes I'm typing and some other things follow, and then all of a sudden I'm answering three lines later. So I hope I'm keeping up on them. But if there's something I've missed, okay, there was a question here. Should progress reports be given like every term? And I think maybe Maria, I heard you cover that you should get progress reports as often as you get other report cards, so any other report card that comes out, you should be getting progress reports on them also. And if you're not getting them, then just reach out to the special ed teacher. They will have them, Sometimes they might put them in a student's backpack as the delivery method, which may not always be the best way to do it. And might not get to you as parents. So we want to make sure that we're giving those to you with every report card that goes out. So
okay. Yes, and we did go over that. So I'm sorry that you're getting a side view of me right now, but there was a question that said, you said that aids are not written into the IEP. So if we are interested in getting a one-on-one aid for our child, how do we go about that? It depends on the needs. So if it's for accommodations, so to help that student access their curriculum, that would go through a Section 504 request, which is a general education request. And you can contact me for that information and we can walk through that process a little more. But like I said, a one-on-one aid to provide instruction. Ryan, do you want to say anything to that?
Well,
Did you
yeah,
want
I just think we need to be real careful. And I'm thinking that, you know, parents have had quite an experience with this with our COVID situations where a lot of the education has fallen back on parents' shoulders, you know. And so we take education very
yeah,
seriously. And I think if we use that comparison to say, we wouldn't want to have an aide be the one responsible for teaching a student, right? We want to make sure the teacher, the professional, the one that knows how to do this is the one that's providing the instruction. If students require more support and they might have a recommendation from a team to go to a special class, you know, a class where we're saying these students require a lot of support, then we staff them that way, right? We staff them with fewer kids, we staff them with a teacher and at least one paraeducator, maybe two or maybe three, to meet the needs of those students within the context of that environment. The thing that we have to be careful of with one-on-one paraeducators for students, and maybe I can just share an experience I had that was pretty profound to me, was there was a student who was in a general education. This was like a 5th or 6th grade, and he was in the general education. He was doing pretty well. He would get some resource services or whatever, and the parent was like, let's just try and see what happens with a paraeducator. So we just tried that for a while. And I was able to go in and observe in the classroom when the student was just in there with all the other kids in the general ed classroom with the teacher instructing, and the teacher did things like pull out this book and turn to page 20 and, you know, whatever. And there was some peers that were there to say, hey, no, this is page 20, not, you know, this other page. And he was engaged and other kids were interacting with him, and he felt a part of the class. And then they brought in this adult, you know, to sit by him, and he just totally withdrew from the class. He wouldn't participate in what the teacher asked. And it was just like we put this stigma attached to him. He wants to learn how to do things on his own. He wants to participate like everybody else does. He wants, you know, all of these opportunities just like everyone else. And sometimes what we do if we have too much adult attention is we create dependence, or we create a separation from the student in the classroom. And so I think there's a lot of things that we need to think through about what types of services we do. And if a student really does require so much attention that they should maybe be referred to a different placement, that's probably a little more fitting for a student than to try and force something in that's really not as beneficial for them. They're aware, you know, everybody's aware of the classroom. All the students are aware of what's going on. They know the adults in there. It really creates a little bit more of a singling out, and you're a separate part of the classroom. And I don't know, I just think that there's a lot that we have to consider when we start talking about adult support for students. But hopefully that gives a little bit to think about on that.
There was another question or a statement that said, is it common for parents to feel like IEP meetings are just a formality and not much is really being done towards the goals? If that's how you're feeling, then you need to talk with your team, because there needs to be a lot happening. I mean, hopefully there's a lot of discussion prior to the IEP meeting, like I said, between you as a parent and the teachers and the service providers, to talk about goals and what your concerns are, what you feel like is important for your student to work on, as well as what the school feels like it's important. But an IEP meeting shouldn't be just like a checklist and we've done it. There needs to be some discussion. If there's a lot of discussion prior to the IEP meeting, then the meeting can be a lot shorter. But it shouldn't feel like just a formality.
Yeah, I think I would add to that, Maria, I agree 100%. I would add to that it might be helpful, you know, from a parent's perspective to ask some questions about, okay, so tell me how this goal has been chosen. Like, what is the current situation, the current levels of performance that drives you to choose this goal, and where is this goal going to lead? So you can ask those questions that might help give a better idea of the purpose of the goal. I mean, really and truly, the reason we have IEPs is because we've identified goals that students needs to work on, right? I mean, that's, if we don't have any goals to work on, then there's no reason for an IEP. For students to say, you know, we wouldn't create just an IEP for no reason, right? So there's something very purposeful that we're trying to do, and it is the goal that we're trying to make progress in. So I wonder if it would be more, if it would feel more meaningful if, you know, we could as a school answer those questions. This is why we chose this goal. This is where we're headed with this goal. This is why this goal is important. Sometimes I think it's easy for us, and I think this happens in every profession. You know, I can think I've been to paint stores and I mean all kinds of things, and I ask questions and they just rattle off responses, and sometimes I think they believe I understand everything they're talking about, right? And I may not be. I mean, I just went to Home Depot and got some stain a couple weeks ago, and the person was like, well, this and this and this, and I'm like, well, I'm not sure that I really understood everything, you know, so sometimes I think we need to just ask those questions. Just let's slow down. Let's just, you know, see if I can get a little bit more clear about it. And teachers should be very comfortable with explaining that, right? Laying it out for you instead of just talking about stuff in terms of thinking that you understand the same thing that they understand, which is maybe not true, you know?
Well, and one thing to think about too as a parent, the school teams are very familiar with IEPs, and they hold several a week or a month, you know, and so sometimes they do go through the process just almost on autopilot because they're used to it. And I shouldn't say not the whole process, but, you know, not stopping and thinking, I need to explain this a little more clearly to the parent, because just because I understand it doesn't mean they understand it. So like Ryan said, don't ever feel like there's too dumb of a question. Don't hesitate to ask questions. If you need clarification, if you're not quite understanding a goal, what the purpose is to the goal, so the goals need to be connected to the core curriculum in some way, and sometimes you're wondering how in the world is that goal connected, or why does my child need to have it connected? They need to be working on this instead of that. You know, there's the educational law that they need to follow, and so asking specific questions, like I said, even if you feel they're stupid, they're not, and it helps the teachers and the related service providers, like Ryan says, slow down and think about what they're talking about and explain it more clearly. So let's see. Do I go through my pediatrician or the school for tests regarding ADHD or autism? So that is a really good question. The school district does not diagnose. They will do testing, but they do not diagnose. So they may do testing and show that your child has autistic tendencies, but they cannot diagnose autism. So to get an actual diagnosis, you will need to go through a private provider. So a pediatrician can diagnose ADHD. Most pediatricians can, and they oftentimes will give you as a parent a questionnaire and then give you a questionnaire to give to the teacher, so they get a more complete picture. But the teacher is not diagnosing. They're just filling out that questionnaire so the pediatrician can diagnose. But same with autism, you need to go to someone that is qualified to diagnose autism. And like I said, you can reach out to me if you need help with that. But I'm glad you asked that question because, right, the district cannot diagnose any disability.
Right, it's interesting. So we only have 13 classifications that we can identify students under for a disability in an educational environment. And one of those classification is autism, but it is not considered a diagnosis. So sometimes there's a little bit of a struggle if parents need a diagnosis of autism, even though we've even done a classification of autism. It may or may not satisfy the criteria like insurance purposes or whatever, to say, yes, our child has autism. So it's a fascinating thing when you've got, a field of DSM diagnoses. There's probably 3,000 different diagnoses that students can have, or people can have, individuals can have. But in the educational system, we can only have 13. There's only 13 options of classifications.
Yeah, great question. All right. Does anybody else have any questions?
There was one more question about where can I find the rules, the procedural safeguards.
Oh, Esperanza put that link on there.
Oh, she already put it in there. Okay.
Yeah. So you can find it on the Utah State Board of Education's website, but you can also, like I said, find it under the Parent Resource tab on the special ed website for the district. I believe I put it under educational resources. We just want to make sure we've answered all your questions. So I am going to bring up a poll, and we are funded by grants. The Utah Parent Center is funded by grants. And so information that we can get from you about this training would be super helpful. So it's anonymous, but if you would please fill out this poll before you exit, that would be awesome. And it would be super helpful. It'd be helpful for me as a presenter, as well as helpful for us to know what information you would like and how you feel about this training. So as you're filling that out, here is the information for the main Utah Parent Center. Like I said, I am a district consultant for Alpine School District. We have, I'm not even sure now, we just hired another district consultant. So there are some district consultants, every district does not have a consultant. But we have parent consultants at our main office that work with families throughout the state. So they work with families who are in charter schools, in rural areas. So we also have Spanish-speaking consultants that can help with families who may have a language barrier. And so yeah, contacting the Parent Center with any of your questions is a great idea. Of course, I think so. And then, as I said, we are funded by grants. We just finished up a fundraiser that we had. And so if you ever feel inclined to donate to the Parent Center, you can go to our website and click on our donate button.